Hi, and welcome back to the Blue Screen Brothers. Last time the two last times we have talked about enterprise app and app registration. And the last episode, I got some nice question for Marius. Hello, Marius.
Hello.
Are you ready to get some bad questions?
I'm always. That's what I most commonly get, so I'm ready.
Yeah. So I think this is Alex episode, so it's Alex time to still set the question. So Alex, do you have any questions about the topics?
I honestly don't know if I should be offended or not, because if I ask they'll get to ask all the questions only to Marius.
Exactly.
We should kind of spread the questions a bit. So yeah, we talked about a lot about enterprise apps and enterprise app registrations, and two questions that always pops up is, what do we really use enterprise apps and registers apps for, and how can we monitor their activities? Do people even use these?
People definitely use this. Yeah. So it's a good bad question, right? So essentially, having an Azure AD without enterprise applications makes no sense, because this is what you use Azure AD for. And that could be, for example, here I have Salesforce. So this is just some dev environment or a demo environment, but you should in your organization have Azure AD as your core identity platform, meaning that all applications that you have that require some kind of identity should trust Azure AD for identities, essentially. And enterprise apps is essentially that trust. So for example, by default in this demo environment, I have Salesforce. So Salesforce is like they're a large provider, right? And they have then added their portal to the gallery, the application gallery in Azure AD. And by default here, I actually have an instance. For some reason, Microsoft has chosen to add Salesforce to all demo tenants. But so that means that all policies, for example, when it comes to let's say conditional access or which devices, which users can access Salesforce. If I want to limit the usage of Salesforce from my office locations only for some reason, or different kinds of things I want to enforce, that's done on this object essentially.
And the biggest benefit here is that when users are logging on to Salesforce, they will be using their own identities and not a Salesforce created username and password.
Exactly. So you could, of course, have on this Salesforce page here, have your own, the same email address, just a separate password, right? And that's way too common. And first of all, it's not really user friendly, and second of all, you lose all control over the different policies that I just mentioned. Multi-factor authentication, for example, needs then to be enforced in Salesforce. So all my users would need both a multi-factor authentication in Azure AD and in Salesforce if you had a separate identity there. So rather than having such a ridiculous system, you would rather have Salesforce just trusting your Azure AD and everything being provided from Azure AD from a way, or the same method that you already have for plenty of other apps, essentially.
And this is a very nice way of.
And now we will only send an access token with our access rights and not our passwords to Salesforce as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what we do. We send an ID token to Salesforce telling who we are, and potentially also an access token if Salesforce, let's say, have an integration towards Microsoft Graph for looking up other users, for example. So then you use Azure AD as the identity control plane for all access, and you don't have distributed passwords, or you might even on Salesforce here have configured outbound provisioning. I don't actually know if this supports it. Well, it does. So in Azure AD, you might even have, you see here, automatically create, update, and delete accounts when users join, leave, and move within your organization. So for example, Salesforce, let's say we have a new hire, and let's for now just say somehow they are assigned to the Salesforce app. That could be them having a job title called seller or something, and they ending up being assigned here. For example, here there's a security group called sales and marketing. This could, for example, be dynamic, right? So they end up in this group, and they are then assigned the Salesforce app. So what we can do now, I don't have Salesforce available, but if I click getting started here, I can insert my required like admin credentials for Salesforce. Click test connection and save. So what Azure AD can do for you then is to actually create the user account in Salesforce. So that means that even though it's 14 days until I start, because I already have created an account or someone created an account for me and assigned to the Salesforce app, then I might already be provisioned as a user in Salesforce. So my colleagues can see me in Salesforce and assign me tasks that I will be doing my second day of work, for example. So there's no need for me to log into Salesforce a first time before appearing, for example. So yeah, that's called outbound provisioning, and that also means that if I leave the company, I can be disabled and eventually deleted from the Salesforce application. That can be very useful to avoid, for example, license usage. Salesforce might be quite expensive, right? So it's very useful to have your employees that no longer work for you for their license to be revoked.
And there's another benefit there because they are being authenticated by our Azure AD. If we disable the user, he will not be able to log on to Salesforce or other third-party sites.
Exactly.
If they have created it manually, you go the risk for the account being available to access data or order stuff even after they have finished. So yeah.
And of course, you've heard of that plenty of times, right? An employee that has left the company, well, his like AD user account has been disabled, but he has access to 7 other systems because he has a separate password there stored in his LastPass or something, and can still wreak havoc.
You mentioned this about multi-factor authentication, and one of the kind of chicken and egg issues you have if your cell phone breaks. Some of these are quite hard to re-authenticate if you don't have access to your old multi-factor authentication token. So by applying this to Azure AD, first of all, they are kind of easy to re-authenticate a brand new device in case you lost your old one. And second of all, you only have to restore 1, not 15.
That is very true, actually. So in the event where you have, well, MFA registered 7 places, and they are all like either these one-time passcodes or something, then yes, absolutely. Also, the multi-factor authentication for Azure AD contains so much more security when it comes to things like getting the context, where is the sign-in from? You need to type this number, or you can at least enable it. You have passwordless methods. You have all kinds of things that these other services usually don't have. They have username, which is your email address. They have a password and maybe MFA. That's sort of what I'm seeing, at least. Of course, I assume Salesforce have MFA, but it will not be as good as the Azure AD MFA that you have today.
So it could be a nice
far
tip.
from it.
Yeah, it could be a nice tip to just explore what kind of multi-factor authentication that application provider does have, and what happens if your employee loses access to their multi-factor authentication device, because we see people handing over their phone because something's broken and they need to send it to a maintenance shop or to get fixed.
Yep.
And way too often those workshops just factory reset your device.
Yeah, they wipe the whole thing.
Yes. So that could be a very cost-intensive labor just to reset the MFA.
Absolutely. And yeah, no, I agree. So so what would happen here is that you have in this outbound provisioning and stuff, we can see a bit on the activity here, because I know many people have questions about, okay, so I have this Salesforce application. What is this used for? Well, you can actually see that in the different logs. So we have the sign-in logs. Mine will be super empty because this is a demo tenant, and I have done nothing.
But you have the Olav app, and Olav app is the most used app in the organization, right?
That is true. So let's say take Olav 2 and go to sign-in logs for that one instead. And we might need to, when did we last record? Last 1 month. Here. So here we can actually see some different sign-ins. So what does this mean? Well, there are some successful sign-ins. So I can actually here see that this is indeed used by this important administrator account and no one else. You can also see success and failure and things like that, and download as CSV, or if you want to, well, play around with it in Excel or whatnot.
Yeah. And you can see the location, and you can see conditional access. You can see that we haven't implemented multi-factor yet on Olav app. And that
correct. So this actually has a single.
Yeah.
This has a single factor authentication. So yeah, you can dig into the usage here. You also have this usage and insights, where you get, since we use this for a single day, we get a single point. But here you could see over time the development of how many sign-in activities you have towards an application. And here, sign-in failures. So why are people failing? Here you see things like response ID token requires the OpenID scope, and all of these were things that we got in the last video. So this can be very useful for troubleshooting if you are getting some information saying that the Olav 2 app is not good. People are experiencing issues all the time. Then this might be where you should start to see what's the most common errors happening here, and you can dig into those.
Yeah, and you can also see that the application is not in use at all. So
exactly. So we can probably delete Olav. It's only one user.
What?
And we have the audit logs. So this is more on the management plane side. So you can actually see here that this add service principal and update service principal. So all of these are things that have happened to this enterprise application. So if you want to see who has actually made any adjustments, for example, you are investigating an application stopped working yesterday. Why is that? Well, someone has fiddled around with some settings. Then you will find all of those here. And you have this provisioning logs, which is this outbound provisioning that I just talked about, where you can figure out why an employee is missing, perhaps if perhaps he already existed he had an email address with overlap of an earlier employee or something strange when trying to create the user profile in the Olav 2 application or service.
I have actually used the provisioning logs in many times to verify or find a problem with the replication of user into different system, because some of the different systems may require attributes that we don't use. For instance, if you're replicating to Google Cloud, everything need to have an email address that's accepted, for instance. So it could not only be a group, but it have to be a group with an email address to get it replicated. So you can see that kind of trouble with provisioning user or groups.
Exactly, and that's actually important that you say. So an enterprise application here can be a rather complex system, right? So you might have a single enterprise application in Azure AD that essentially represents your whole Google Cloud. Or you can synchronize users and groups through outbound provisioning, which is actually what is happening. So the Google Cloud I believe it's a single application, a single enterprise app, but you add the outbound provisioning in order to scope which users and groups you want to sync, and then you can assign those different permissions in Google Cloud. And then you can have Azure AD as your single source of identity, even though you work in a multi-cloud environment, which is super nice. Other things we can talk about is probably you have
you have if you take a look at the usage and insights when you are on all application, you will see that you have a bit of a different view.
Yes, that is true. So in this view here, you can see more of, which applications are actually in use, and you can do things like sorting on failed sign-ins. So if you want to be a bit more proactive, trying to figure out, okay, so why is the success rate so low for Olav 2, while the Azure portal and Microsoft Graph is 100% success, but this application must be utter rubbish. So you can then
but it's a more popular application than Azure portal and
it is.
PowerShell.
It's more used, as you can see. That is true. So no, the usage and insights is a very useful view for troubleshooting, and and you can see here that these audit logs, for example, and sign-in logs are also available on the enterprise applications page, but here they will be scoped to all applications, so meaning the directory rather than a single application. So the view that we had when going into the enterprise application, if you look at this, you will essentially see that that's just added a filter for the client app. That's the only difference.
But the good thing here is that if you don't know if you have any problem, if you're just doing a health check, it could be smart to go in and see that some of your application actually doesn't work at all with 0% successful rate. I have seen a lot of them. So, and I've seen month after month with 0 logins, and then I just figure out this application should be removed. So it's a way of cleaning up instead of going into single applications. It could be nice to see the all over overview.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't recall if we actually talked about the consent and permissions part. I can just mention it a bit.
So we didn't see the default setting, so we just saw how we could set it. So this is the default setting, right?
Yeah. So essentially, you have the notion of a consent to an application, right? So that we talked about, meaning that you as an administrator can consent that an application can indeed read all users, for example. But often you might want your users to be able to essentially just use your company identity. So use your Azure AD towards, well, any random application that they encounter, but you don't want them to be able to open up their files and emails and calendar and all that kind of stuff. Just sign in. That's a bit like when you do Facebook, right? So you have some apps that require access to your everything, ranging from your name and email address to your picture, friends, and birth certificate, while other applications just require some kind of basic profile. So with this classification of permissions, you can actually say that, okay, so these 5, which is the Microsoft recommended ones, I want to classify as low severity and or low risk. That means that by doing what I did now, I say that, okay, so profile, user read, OpenID, email, and offline access, they are all low risk because they are all only giving access to a tiny bit of profile data. It's the first and last name, it's the email address, it's maybe an identifier of the user, and that's it essentially. And now I can also, through the user settings here, say that my let's see if I can actually figure out where they now move that button. Okay, so I did now allow my users. Yeah, this is the one. So under user consent settings, but by now changing to this, which is the recommended setting for Microsoft, I now allow my users to consent to low impact scopes. So meaning that when I click save here now, any user can essentially find a random application on the internet and sign in with their company ID. And I guess plenty of people will say that is crazy. But is it though? So if your user want to use Lucidchart or some other application, how they sign in is important because it's much more secure if they simply bring their company identity, sign in, and use the application. That's much better than them taking the same password that they have in their Azure AD account, using that password and the same email address in Lucidchart or in this third-party application and create an account there, because then you have no control over where that user signed in. Of course, that's bad practice, but this is your users we're talking about, right? They do all kinds of bad stuff. So I would very strongly recommend saying that these 5 recommended ones, the user can be allowed to use their company ID to any application as long as it only requires this. That is fine. While if the application require mail.read or calendar.read or something, then an administrator must actually come in and say, okay, yeah, this is fine. We have bought this application or something. Because the danger is that your password, that should of course be unique in every service, users don't care about that. You cannot trust them to set the same or a different password all over. So I would say it's much better to allow them to use your company ID and giving you at least some kind of insight into what they do, rather than saying block and then the user will go ahead and use the sign up button and create a personal account locally in that service anyway.
One thing that is a bit sad is that there are just too many applications that should survive with these 5 permissions, but they still require more. So we get a lot of requests for access, and they require some insanely high permissions just based for something, getting information out of your calendar or get your default information. So this should be more used. Yeah.
I wonder how many applications have essentially said that, there's so many different things here. Okay, should we just go through like this?
Yeah. To be sure, we just ask for everything, then we are sure it will work, right? So
yeah.
And that's sad because we are using the same, we are using this setting, but still we get a lot of requests for easy application that just need your email, maybe your contact information and stuff like that, but nothing else. But still, it just require a bit too high level. And in most cases, we say no because I don't want to give uncontrolled access above the low level.
But this is something we train everyone for, Olav, because we say we should always start and open up for rights. You should never lock it down.
Yeah, it's better to start with as closed as possible and rather open up if necessary. So
yeah, and because one of the reasons why this is the recommendation and not, for example, saying that users can essentially just say mail.read, for example, add permissions like this. So the reason why this is not necessarily a good recommendation is that the combination of mail.read and offline access, that actually means that an application requesting these two will be able to get the so-called refresh token for the user. So they will essentially be able to read that user's email forever and ever until it's disabled or the refresh token is revoked. Happens through different methods, but that's not really good practice, because if that refresh token is stolen, then well, someone has read access to your email, and that's not really that fun. But of course, it exists applications where this is a good idea, but that should require an admin consent. Your user should not be able to open that. So let's go ahead and say delete and follow Microsoft's best practice. And you have this medium and high. So these are in preview, and I haven't really recommended using them yet. But at some point, you will be able to say, for example, perhaps your super users will have, they will be allowed to consent to medium applications, while high might require some approval of someone or something like that.
I can see the usage because we have a lot of developers adding their own application, and if they need to increase the permission for instance, for CRM systems like that, it could be okay that they just say okay, because those are the guys making the solution, so they should be they are better rusted to do it than me. So
yeah, absolutely. So there's plenty of so this is a whole, I guess, sort of a field of expertise, this whole applications and their permissions and scopes and stuff.
Yeah.
And we haven't even talked about, the more technical, like the protocols behind what is going on when you sign in and things. But I think we're going to leave that for some other time.
Yeah. So, Alexander, do you feel that you now know why you have enterprise applications?
Why do I still bother? All my questions are silly, right?
Yeah.
We can say one more thing. So just about Azure AD roles and managing the app registrations and enterprise applications. because you have several ways of delegating access to these essentially. So it depends a bit on what you want to delegate and to whom. So for example, let's say you have this enterprise application here, and you would like someone to be able to assign new users to it. Not to all enterprise applications, because you have a few roles here called global administrator, which everybody knows that should be very few people. You have cloud application administrator and application administrator. So these cloud application administrator and application administrator roles are both very useful, but they are also directory wide by default, meaning that if you just go in and assign cloud application administrator to a user, he is actually quite powerful. He can add secrets to applications that might have a lot of permissions. So he can actually climb a bit in permissions. So you should be very careful when assigning permissions on the directory level. But instead,
what's the difference between cloud application and application administrator?
yeah, that is a good question. And a cloud application administrator can do the same exact thing, except, as you can see here, stuff that has to do with application proxy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So application administrator and application administrator have a bit higher because that one can do application proxy as well.
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct.
Because I have both, and I don't know when to use which, but now I know if I have a application proxies, I need to use one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I now go to this enterprise application and then to roles and administrators, on this enterprise app, I have two different roles. So you can see this cloud application administrator is listed here. So this is actually a role that is configured only on this enterprise app. So now I can actually go in here and assign, for example, an eligible assignment to one of my users. And you can actually see that the scope is Olav 2.
Yeah.
So that means that I can provide Adele that very powerful permission, but only on this single application. So now she has a PIM role, but this also works if you don't have Azure AD Premium P2. So meaning that you will have an active assignment instead. So that's very useful to know about, that you can delegate that on the application level.
Yeah, that's really nice, because then it's more granular control over something that you don't want to give to everybody, but you have to set it on a different application, because usually you would have said that you are the owner and you can do everything, but you don't have PIM on owner, but you can actually set them as cloud application administrator with a PIM solution. Nice.
Yeah. Also, the owner cannot do all the things that this cloud application administrator can do. So this is a bit more powerful. And yeah, it's very useful to know about that this exists and that you can actually delegate it out to your organization, because, well, everything you don't have to do, then you can drink more coffee.
And as a second option there is that with the cloud adoption administrator role, you can actually assign it to a group instead of owners that need to be a single user.
Yes, you can do that, but then it needs to be
an Azure AD only group. Yeah.
Azure AD only group, and with this role assignable.
Yeah.
So because then it needs to be, when you create a group, you can essentially say yes on this. Azure AD roles can be assigned to the group. Then you can do that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Perfect. Yeah.
then I guess that's a wrap.
Yeah, it's only a couple of hours of apps management in Azure we have done now, so I think this should be a good one for the books if you need to learn something about enterprise app management, managed app, and app registrations. Are you happy, Alexander?
Yes, I am finally satisfied with grand tour of app registration.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
Very cool.
Okay, until next time then.
Until next time. Thank you.